You know that awkward moment when you're walking down the street and someone steps directly in your path? You step right, they step right. You step left, they step left. You do this weird, awkward little dance. You both laugh, and then you walk away. It's just a funny, harmless mistake, right? But now, imagine you are not a person. Imagine you are a massive, thousands of tons steel ocean liner carrying hundreds of sleeping passengers. And you are doing that exact same awkward dance in the middle of a pitch black, freezing ocean, completely blinded by fog. History isn't always about epic heroes and evil villains. Sometimes, history is just about being in the absolute wrong place at the absolute wrong time. Today, we are looking at the most absurd, devastating, and mind-bendingly unlucky disasters in human history. And I promise you, by the end of this, your daily problems are going to look like an absolute joke. Let's start with that awkward dance in the middle of the ocean. Year 1914. The Empress of Ireland was a massive Canadian ocean liner. She was an absolute professional, having safely crossed the Atlantic 95 times. But her 96th voyage was cursed. It's around 2 a.m. The ship is gliding down the river toward the open ocean, carrying about 1,500 people. In the distance, the crew spots the lights of another ship. It's the Storstad, a heavy, metal-reinforced cargo ship hauling 10,000 tons of coal. The weather is perfectly clear. Both ships can see each other from miles away. They are on a path to safely pass each other with plenty of room. No problem at all. But then, the universe decided to play a very dark joke. Right as the two giant ships got close, a thick, impenetrable wall of fog rolled in out of nowhere. Visibility dropped to 0. They were completely blind. Now, like two blindfolded giants, they had to rely entirely on their foghorns to communicate. The Empress blew 3 short blasts. In maritime language, this means, I am throwing my engines in reverse, and I am stopping. The captain decided to just sit still and wait for the fog to clear. The Storstad responded with 1 long blast, meaning, I am still moving forward. But there was a huge problem. The sound of that horn was way too close. Seconds later, piercing through the fog, the massive, pitch-black steel bow of the Storstad slammed directly into the side of the Empress. The impact was deafening. Hundreds of sleeping passengers were crushed instantly in their beds. The captain of the Empress desperately screamed at the other ship, "Don't reverse! Keep her full ahead!" He knew that if the other ship stayed plugged into the hole, it would act like a cork, buying them time to evacuate. But it was too late. The strong river currents violently ripped the two ships apart. A massive, gaping wound was left wide open on the side of the Empress. Thousands of tons of freezing water violently rushed in. The ship sank to the bottom of the river in just 14 minutes. Over 1,000 people died. And do you want to know the absolute, most infuriating irony of this entire disaster? Just minutes after the Empress disappeared beneath the water, the fog completely lifted. The sky was perfectly clear again. If they had just waited 5 more minutes, 1,000 people would still be alive. If ships miscommunicating is terrifying, what do you call it when nature declares a completely silent war on you? When we think of natural disasters, we think of massive earthquakes, explosive volcanoes, or terrifying tornadoes. But on August 21st, 1986, the people living around Lake Nyos in Cameroon weren't killed by fire or earthquakes. They were killed by a burp. I know that sounds funny, but the reality was straight out of a horror movie. Lake Nyos is incredibly deep, and it sits directly on top of volcanic activity. For hundreds of years, that volcano had been leaking millions of tons of carbon dioxide directly into the bottom of the lake. The immense water pressure kept the gas trapped at the bottom. It was exactly like a giant, violently shaken bottle of soda, with the cap screwed on tight. But that night, something bumped the bottle. Maybe a small landslide, maybe a tiny tremor. Whatever it was, it completely threw off the lake's balance. The cap popped off. In a fraction of a second, 300,000 tons of toxic carbon dioxide erupted from the bottom of the lake. The water level literally dropped by over 3 feet. Because CO2 is heavier than air, it didn't float up. Instead, it formed a thick, invisible, silent fog that poured down the hillside at 30 miles per hour, heading straight for the sleeping villages below. It was an unstoppable, invisible assassin. The gas completely swallowed the village of Lower Neos. The people didn't even have time to understand what was happening. They just took a breath, collapsed to the dirt, and lost consciousness within seconds. Those who were sleeping simply never woke up. There was no explosion, no fire, no destruction of homes, just the terrifying silence of death. Within minutes, 98% of the village's population was wiped out. When the sun rose the next morning, it revealed a scene of absolute horror. 1,700 people, 3,500 cows and horses, even the birds in the sky and the insects on the ground. Everything was dead. There wasn't a single fly buzzing. The universe had simply pressed the delete button on an entire region. If nature has its own brutal rules, human stupidity has absolutely no limits. Let's go back to ships. But this time, we're adding the effect of an atomic bomb. December 6, 1917. Halifax Harbor, Canada. World War I is raging. 2 ships are navigating the harbor. The first is the SS Emo, an empty, impatient ship. The captain is tired of waiting, breaks harbor speed limits, and recklessly zips through the water. The second is the SS Mont Blanc. And there is only one thing you need to know about the Mont Blanc. It wasn't a ship. It was a literal floating bomb. It was packed to the brim with 3,000 tons of high explosives and hundreds of barrels of highly flammable aviation fuel. The impatient SS Emo veered directly into the path of the floating bomb. Both ships honked, slammed their brakes, and essentially just bumped heads. The collision happened at roughly 1 mile per hour. It was barely a fender bender, but that tiny bump knocked over the barrels of aviation fuel, spilling it all over the deck. As the ship scraped apart, metal rubbed against metal, producing one single spark. And that spark landed right in the fuel. The ship caught fire. The crew of the Mont Blanc knew exactly what they were carrying. They basically screamed, "We are dead!" jumped into their lifeboats, and frantically rowed to shore, yelling at everyone, "Run! The ship is going to blow!" But human psychology is a funny thing. If something is on fire and you think you are safe, what do? You watch. The citizens of Halifax rushed to their windows. Children ran down to the docks. Everyone stood there, fascinated, watching the burning ship like it was a free fireworks show. They thought it was just a normal boat fire. At 9:04 a.m., the show ended. The Mont Blanc detonated its 3,000 tons of explosives. It was the largest man-made explosion in human history before the invention of the atomic bomb. The shock wave instantly vaporized everything within a 1.5-mile radius. Entire buildings were deleted from existence. Massive ships were tossed into the air like bath toys. Hundreds of people who were happily watching from their windows were instantly blinded by shards of flying glass. 1,600 people were erased from the earth in a single millisecond. Another 9,000 were severely injured. The city was completely flattened. And then, the universe decided to deliver the ultimate punchline. While rescuers were desperately digging through the rubble trying to save the survivors, the very next day, Halifax was hit by a massive, historic blizzard. The injured and homeless were now freezing to death under 16 inches of snow. If there is a definition for peak human bad luck, this is exactly it. If you think nature and ships are cruel, wait until you see what human safety regulations can do. Let's head back to dry land. We invent rules to keep ourselves safe, but sometimes those exact rules become your ultimate killer. Welcome to the security oven. May 8th, 1842, France. Trains were the brand new absolute miracle of the world. After a massive festival in Versailles, over 700 happy French citizens boarded a train back to Paris. The train was massive, 18 wooden carriages pulled by 2 powerful steam locomotives. They are flying down the tracks at 25 miles per hour, enjoying the view. Back then, that felt like warp speed. But suddenly, snap. The axle on the front locomotive breaks from metal fatigue. The train violently derails. The second engine, still under full power, slams directly into the first one. The engines shatter, and hundreds of pounds of burning, red-hot coal spill directly onto the freshly painted wooden passenger cars. In a matter of seconds, the entire train is engulfed in a massive inferno. The passengers panic. They try to jump out. They grab the door handles. They pull, they kick, they scream, but the doors will not open. Why? Because in the 19th century, European railway companies had a very strict safety rule. To stop people from jumping off moving trains or escaping without a ticket, every single passenger car must be locked from the outside. It is the darkest irony in human history. The very rule meant to keep them safe had just locked 700 people inside a literal blazing oven. The passengers were trapped. A few lucky ones managed to smash the tiny glass windows and throw themselves out, but the vast majority were stuck inside the nightmare. By the time the fire was put out, rescuers were completely frozen in horror. The bodies were so melted together, so completely turned to ash, that the official death toll of 55 was just a blind guess. Historians believe over 200 people were burned alive that day. They had to use leftover teeth and skull measurements just to identify a handful of them. The rule to lock train doors from the outside was abolished practically overnight, but it cost hundreds of people being roasted alive to make it happen. Now, let's end this video with something a little lighter, but absolutely disgustingly shameful. If you think ancient kings and knights only died heroic, epic deaths on the battlefield with a sword in their chest, the Erfurt disaster is going to completely destroy that illusion. Year 1184. The Holy Roman Empire. The city of Erfurt. A massive political dispute is happening between 2 highly sensitive nobles. To settle it, the King of Germany himself, Henry VI, shows up. Over 100 of the most powerful, wealthy men in the empire, knights, bishops, counts, and barons, all wearing heavy silk and gold, cram into a single second-floor room of an old church. They are yelling. They are fiercely arguing over land borders. But they forgot one tiny, crucial detail. The centuries-old wooden floor could not support the weight of 100 fat, heavily dressed nobles. Right in the middle of the argument, crack! The floor completely gives way. Over 100 of the most elite men in the empire instantly plummet to the first floor. But the tragedy didn't stop there. The sheer impact of 100 falling bodies completely shattered the first floor too. And they kept falling, right into the basement. And what was in the basement? A massive, open, centuries-old cesspit used by all the monks in the city. A literal, giant, suffocating pool of human waste. Can you imagine? One second you are a powerful noble draped in gold, deciding the fate of an empire, and the next second, you are plunging into a pitch-black ocean of liquid feces and toxic methane gas. Many were knocked unconscious from the fall and drowned directly in the waste. Others suffocated from the toxic fumes. By the time rescuers pulled them out of the absolute sludge, at least 60 nobles and knights had met their end in the most humiliating, disgusting way possible. And what happened to King Henry? He got incredibly lucky. He was sitting in a stone window frame carved into the wall. He clung to the stone, staring down in absolute horror at the sea of sewage below, until he was eventually rescued with a ladder. I don't know what land those nobles were fighting over, but after that meeting, they didn't need it anymore. So, what is the moral of the story? History isn't always about brilliant strategy, glorious empires, and heroic last stands. Sometimes, a wall of fog, an invisible gas, a locked door, or a rotting toilet floor can completely change the fate of thousands of people. It doesn't matter how much power you hold, how much money you have, or how well protected you think you are. When death comes, it doesn't care about your rank. And sometimes, it just wants to laugh at you. If you enjoyed these dark, mind-bending, and absolutely absurd historical facts they never taught you in school, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Let me know in the comments, which of these deaths was the absolute worst? Until next time, stay safe out there.